count 4 here. As you can see, the first 3 counts, the former president of the United States, Donald Trump, found guilty of 3 felony counts so far, the 4-person in that courtroom. Count 4, guilty. Count 5, guilty. Count 6, guilty. As we continue to enter in what we're learning from the courtroom, it's our belief that first 19 counts, I'm being told, the former president has been found guilty of. Counts 20 through 23 found guilty as well. So correct me, control room, all the way through count 23 now found guilty. We are now up to count 26 and count 27 found guilty as well. So again, I'm going to pause here. He's been found guilty 31 counts now of guilty as we wait for the graphic to catch up to the reporting coming from the courthouse. Count 33 and counts 34 coming in right now. Guilty on all counts. This jury in New York City, a jury of his peers finding the former president guilty on every single felony count brought against him by the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. Aaron Katersky outside the courthouse. Let's go to you for first reaction.
An incredible verdict on this day in May, late May. The former president of the United States convicted as charged. 34 counts of falsifying business records. And David, as the crowd outside this courthouse found out, a big cheer went up from opponents of the former president who had been massing in the park across the street from the courthouse. Just a whooping cheer, and they continue to make a lot of noise. There have been supporters of the former president here as well. It looks like many of them are hanging in there, but are remaining silent as the former president has been convicted on all 34 counts of falsifying business records, meaning, David, the jury believed the Manhattan District Attorney's theory of the case that the former president falsified these records to cover up a conspiracy to corrupt the 2016 election by hiding lewd stories from his past. David?
Aaron, as we know from the instructions from the judge in this case, Juan Merchan, telling that jury that they could not convict solely on the testimony of Michael Cohen, Donald Trump's longtime former fixer, friend, and attorney, that there must be corroborating evidence in this case that they also believe in coming up with any sort of verdict. I glean from that then in the discussions within that jury room, and we will learn more in the days ahead, that they then pointed to other evidence, and we know about the request that they look at testimony from David Pecker, for example, to be reread back to them this morning, that is the kind of corroborating evidence that they must have leaned in on to come up with 34 guilty findings on every count here. The former president found guilty as we're on the air this afternoon. Aaron, again, testimony from David Pecker and other evidence presented by the prosecution, they must have leaned on not solely the testimony of Michael Cohen here.
They were told they couldn't rely solely on Michael Cohen because he was an accomplice in the alleged, or now found, scheme to corrupt the 2016 election, and so they did need corroborating evidence and testimony, and they may have found it in the testimony of David Pecker, because one of the things they asked to hear again today was how both men described a meeting in August of 2015, 2 months after Donald Trump had announced his candidacy, when prosecutors said this conspiracy was hatched. David Pecker at the National Enquirer would buy and bury unflattering stories. He said he agreed to be the eyes and ears of the Trump campaign, and prosecutors said it amounted to a campaign finance violation. And Michael Cohen described the meeting very much the same way, saying that he recalled Pecker telling Trump he would be the eyes and ears of the Trump campaign. Perhaps that was the corroborating evidence and testimony that the jury needed, David. They also wanted to make sure they understood the judge's instructions of how to find out how to convict somebody of falsification of business records. And the judge told them that even if Trump didn't personally falsify the records, that he could be found guilty if he caused other people, like an accounting department of the Trump organization or Michael Cohen or someone else, to falsify those records on his behalf.
All right, Aaron Katersky, stay with us here. Aaron Katersky, who has covered every day of this trial for us outside the courthouse there. Obviously, we also have a team inside court, both in the courtroom and in this overflow room. And I just want to bring everyone at home watching our ABC News Live coverage here of an historic day here. The former President Donald Trump found guilty on all 34 counts in the hush money case that involved Stormy Daniels in the lead up to the 2016 election. Found guilty again on all counts by a jury of his peers. Again, we know the makeup of this jury come from a cross-section of life in this country. 2 attorneys among that jury pool. It's been said in other cases along the way that the prosecution doesn't always like having lawyers sitting in that jury box, but in this case, both sides agreed to those 2 jurors in particular, lawyers who perhaps, as we'll find out in the days to come, might have helped explain some of the very detailed jury instructions from Judge Juan Merchan. Again, the former president you see there on the screen found guilty on all counts. Some of the color coming in from the courtroom from our team. The former president, Donald Trump, watching very closely as the jury was polled. They all replied yes when asked if this was their verdict. The district attorney himself, Alvin Bragg, stern-faced in the courtroom. Todd Blanche was the one who asked to poll the jury. Of course, that is the lead defense attorney in this case for Donald Trump. Donald Trump watching again as they were being polled, looking over at the jury as each one of them was individually polled on the verdict. One of our reporters describing the former president as slumped over in his chair, slumped somewhat, looking at the jury as they delivered the verdict, adjusting his head each time to get a look at each of the jurors as, again, they were polled individually. So again, just describing, and it's obviously the limitations of the court system here in New York, no cameras in court. But as we know, we've described to you what would happen. The judge would enter that courtroom. Donald Trump would stand along with others in that courtroom. The jury then re-entering the 4-person standing, saying we do have a verdict. The judge asking the 4-person what that verdict would be. And then we watched, even on the screen here, the graphics could not keep up with the speed at which the verdict was delivered. 34 counts. All 34 of them, the former president found guilty in this hush money case. I want to bring in Dan Abrams with us just as we came on the air, now with me here in the studio. And Dan, you and I have talked. There were all sorts of plausible scenarios here, what the jury could decide. Perhaps guilty on some counts, not guilty on others. Obviously, the chance of a mistrial or a hung jury, it would take just 1 juror for that scenario. That's not what played out this afternoon. To have 34 counts and to have a jury find over the course of 2 days the former president guilty on all 34 counts, what does this say to you?
So let's be clear. If there had been a split verdict, if there had been convictions on, let's say, 9, just the ones, for example, where Donald Trump had signed the checks, it would have been unlikely, unusual. Most people watching this case expected either there's going to be an acquittal, there'll be a hung jury, or they'll be guilty on all charges. It would have been surprising if the jurors had split the verdicts, because it's really all basically the same set of facts. It's just a question of which ledger and which check. So either you believe it or you don't. And so the fact that it's 34, we have to be careful here, right? Let's not overstate what that means. Because, for example, when it comes to sentencing, it's not as if the sentence is going to involve 34 counts where each count ends up being served consecutively. There is almost no doubt that whatever sentence happens here, the sentence will be concurrent, meaning all of it will be served at the same time for the 34. So in effect,
about a sentence. Yeah, let me stop you right there, because viewers at home are going to ask immediately, what does this mean? Could the former president be sentenced to potential time behind bars? We know there is the potential for that, though extremely unlikely for a first-time offender, correct?
I think it is unlikely. This is the lowest level felony in the state of New York. We talk about misdemeanors versus felonies, but there's also different levels of felony. This is a Class E felony, the lowest kind. Donald Trump has never been convicted of a crime before. I think as a result, it is unlikely, not impossible, that he would be sentenced to prison time in connection with this case. There are other options, right? There is probation. I think the other potential option could be home confinement. Can you imagine that? And in an effort, if it were to happen before the election, someone who wants to be out on the campaign trail. Again, I think any serving of a sentence, though, very unlikely to happen before the election. A number of things will happen first. First, he'll do an interview with the probation department. That is typical in any case. You have a meeting where you talk to he's going to have this meeting with a probation officer, because the probation department then recommends what sentence they think the person ought to get. And then number two is a sentencing happen weeks, months ahead. There's going to be appeals in this case, etc. So I think that the actual serving of the sentence, whatever it is probably some time away.
Sometime away, Judge Juan Merchan will take into account whatever the probation officer suggests after this meeting that you say will take place, regardless of whether you're sitting across from somebody who does what you and I do, or somebody who works in sort of any sector here in New York City and beyond. But this is the former president of the United States who will also have to sit across from this probation officer. How soon would we then hear from Judge Juan Merchan what the sentence will be?
So I think that we're going to see when the sentencing date is set, right? So we're watching some people.
We are watching the courthouse very closely. Donald Trump was expected to be able to leave the courtroom today. Of course, as Dan mentioned, the sentencing will not come for many weeks here, not expected certainly. We are expecting the former president to leave the courthouse. Have we seen him in front of the camera yet? We have not seen him yet, as we know that he generally addresses reporters when he comes out of the courtroom. There's no promise here that he will today. Sentencing is set for early July. July 11th is what we've been told. Judge Juan Merchan will deliver the sentence on July 11th, which is obviously a little more than a month from now. There is no bail. He will leave court today, a free man for now, certainly. And as you heard Dan report there, and legal analysts across the board have said that jail time in this case extremely, extremely unlikely. But obviously it leads to some immediate questions right away when you're talking about the presumptive Republican nominee in the race for the White House. Does it change the race? At least right now, it doesn't. He can continue to run for president regardless of this conviction on 34 felony counts today. Some have asked, will Donald Trump be able to vote? I had been doing some reading on that because he now has residency in Florida. In the state of Florida, Dan, they often defer to where the case was tried. Is that not correct?
Correct.
So in New York, they allow certain felons to vote of certain categories, right? So it's my understanding that Donald Trump would potentially be able to vote. But let's watch the former president expected to address the cameras. Let's listen.
This was a disgrace. This was a rigged trial by a conflicted judge who was corrupt. It's a rigged trial, a disgrace. They wouldn't give us a venue change. We were at 5% or 6% in this district, in this area. This was a rigged, disgraceful trial. The real verdict is going to be November 5th by the people. And they know what happened here, and everybody knows what happened here. You have a Soros backed DA and the whole thing. We didn't do a thing wrong. I'm a very innocent man, and it's okay. I'm fighting for our country. I'm fighting for our Constitution. Our whole country is being rigged right now. This was done by the Biden administration in order to wound or hurt an opponent, a political opponent. And I think it's just a disgrace. And we'll keep fighting. We'll fight till the end and we'll win. Because our country's gone to hell. We don't have the same country anymore. We have a divided mess. We're a nation in decline, serious decline. Millions and millions of people pouring into our country right now from prisons and from mental institutions, terrorists. And they're taking over our country. We have a country that's in big trouble. But this was a rigged decision right from day one with a conflicted judge who should have never been allowed to try this case, never. And we will fight for our Constitution. This is long from over. Thank you very much.
Todd Blanche at the president's side, Todd Blanche, the defense attorney, the president turning around, not taking any questions. Former President Donald Trump, a short time after listening to the foreperson deliver the guilty verdict on all 34 counts, Todd Blanche then asking each juror to be polled, each juror then saying that they agreed with the finding. This was unanimous, all 34 counts found guilty. The former president moments ago saying this is a disgrace, this was a rigged trial, a rigged decision, and immediately turning to the race for president, saying the real verdict will come on November 5th from the American people. He went on to say, I'm a very innocent man, and again, called the whole process rigged. John Carl, our chief Washington correspondent. John, not surprising here that there would be an immediate pivot now to November.
Thanks for staying with us. That jury in Manhattan coming to a verdict in Donald Trump's criminal hush money trial just a few moments ago, finding the former president guilty on all counts.
Jurors deliberated for more than 4 hours Wednesday before asking the judge to rehear both jury instructions and portions of testimony from key witnesses. Prosecutors argued that the former president falsified business records to cover up an alleged hush money payment to adult film actress Stormy Daniels. Trump has denied any wrongdoing. We will continue our coverage in just a moment. Newswatch 16 will be right back.